Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament, in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme, we'll be discussing some of the major news stories that have shaped 2017. And my guest for this programme is Tomas Sandell, the sponsor, the founder of the European Coalition for Israel, and Alex Benjamin of Israel-Europe Public Affairs. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Tomas, can you just update our viewers on some of the very important diplomatic activities that the European Coalition for Israel has been involved in regarding Israel and diplomacy?
Thank you, Simon, and again, it's good to have you back on the program.
Nice to be back.
And it's good to sit on this side and not to step in for you.
You did very well, though. You did very well.
Thank you. Simon, the last few weeks have been quite interesting in Helsinki. We've spoken often on this program about the problem with the Palestinian textbooks, how they incite to hatred and violence. And what we found out recently was that the International Committee overlooking the funding and the supervision of the Palestinian curricula are actually chaired by the Finnish government. So being a Finn and being based in Helsinki, this is of special concern for us. I should also mention that Belgium is the vice chairman. So we have been raising awareness, State Secretary of Foreign Affairs with the key members of the Finnish Parliament of what is going on. And it was shocking for them to see what are the results of the Finnish funding, invested into Palestinian education, to see that it's actually promoting radicalism in the region. And to quote the State Secretary, he said, this is shocking, we have to do something. And next up is we are planning to meet with the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister to raise it on that level so that they are aware of what is going on. And I think for me as a Finn, it's absolutely essential that our country would promote peace in that region and not further radicalization. So that's one of the most important missions that we've done in the last few weeks.
I'd say in the last few years, because that's incredibly important. So
it is,
well done,
yes.
Well done, Tomas. And Alex, always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Maybe you can update our viewers on some of the activities that your organisation, Israel-Europe Public Affairs, has been doing here in the European Parliament and elsewhere in Brussels and Europe.
Well, I'm pleased to say, Simon, and this is quite unscripted, I can assure you, but Tomas and I are more or less working on the same issue. We're taking a slightly broader overview on incitement to violence as a whole within Palestinian society. And what we're really trying to focus on is conditionality of EU aid. Now, for instance, Tomas is quite rightly dealing with the issue of textbooks. There's an organisation based in Israel called Impact.se, and we're bringing them over to Brussels in January. This organisation uses UNESCO's own guidelines on what should and shouldn't be taught. And the new Palestinian textbooks are actually worse than ever before. So we have this Palestinian youth coming forward that are being fed by the Palestinian Authority, whom the EU is supporting with aid to their Ministry of Education. Some countries are starting to pull back, thank goodness, the Belgians, and hopefully Tomas will make progress with the Finns as well. But this idea of this perpetuating cycle, that we can't really talk about a peace process if one side is completely unprepared for peace. If the EU, which gives its money willy-nilly anyway, regardless of what they say, whether they incite violence or they don't incite violence, where's the impetus for change? Where's the impetus to come to the table? And so we believe that bringing conditionality, i.e., let me be clear what conditionality is, Simon. What we mean by that is that the EU, as one of the biggest donors to the Palestinian Authority, can say, okay, you want to talk about filthy Jewish feet on the Temple Mount? You want to educate your children that Jews are pigs and apes, and the only way to defeat them is through struggle and through jihad? We're going to turn off the money tap, or at least we're going to slow it down to a trickle. And this is what we believe is necessary to happen. That is our main goal as an organisation, to ensure that that happens.
And that's essential for actually creating peace on the ground and grassroots peace initiatives amongst ordinary Palestinians, because obviously if they're not educated and prepared for peace, then how can they live at peace?
The key point is, I mean, there's no point in even having a dialogue. I mean, I used to work in Northern Ireland during the peace process, and the only reason we got Sinn Féin and the IRA to come to the table was because they rejected the expression at the time was, we've changed from the Armalite to the ballot box. And the Palestinian Authority haven't got that far yet. They haven't got to the stage where they can admit or they can openly discuss the fact that Israel is going to exist no matter what. They're still stuck in a narrative that somehow the Nakba, as they call the catastrophe of 48, can be overturned. And until we get to a stage where that narrative changes, there's very little point in discussing peace.
Yep. Well done. Really, really important work. So really appreciate that, Alex. Thomas, 2017 has been quite an eventful year. But for you, what are some of the news highlights that have really had a big impact on Israel, big impact on the Middle East and Europe in the year 2017?
Yes, you may say that 2016 was the game changer, as we discussed last year with the Brexit, with the election of Donald Trump. Of course, in 2017, we've seen a little bit of the ramification of, with the Brexit, what the implications have been for European integration as a whole. And also, Donald Trump was inaugurated in January, and we are now into the 10th, 11th month of his presidency, which of course have reshaped the whole discussion about the Middle East, peace in the Middle East. So I think these two major events in the US and in Europe, of course, have still had a major effect in 2017 and will continue to shape history going into 2018. Looking at the Middle East, of course, this was, thank God, a year when there were no wars, where Israel was involved. But of course, what happened in 2017 is this very remarkable rapprochement between Israel and basically the Gulf states and the Sunni Muslim countries. We're talking about Egypt, we're talking about Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and some of the statements that we've seen just in the last few weeks coming out of Saudi Arabia, of Bahrain, the king saying that, we have no objections to people from Bahrain traveling to Israel, and that the Arab countries should end their boycott of Israel. And we know what happened with Saudi Arabia just in the last 2 weeks. I mean, these are major milestones. Looking at the conflict 70 years, this is something that has the potential, of course, to reshape this dynamics completely. Of course, it's too early to tell, what will be the real ramifications. I think future will tell, and obviously the next few months will tell what this will mean for Israel. But what we do know with the three things I just mentioned is that it's a new ball game in the Middle East altogether, and we should be prepared and think outside of the box. But I agree completely with Alex that unless we can prepare the people for peace and coexistence, nothing's going to happen.
No, absolutely. Very, very valid and interesting points, Thomas. And Alex, what would you say were some of the groundbreaking events with huge strategic ramifications that occurred in 2017?
I've got to echo what Tomas said again. Trump's been a game changer. I'm no fan of him, I must admit. But sometimes, in order to move forward, let's look at certain situations. Politicians like stability. The financial markets like stability. But equally, sometimes they like a bit of volatility to shake things up. And I think that's where we are with Trump. Now, what Trump has done is he's completely reframed the argument. And whereas before there were certain strategic imperatives between countries and language or conventions or whatever, he's got no time for any of those. As far as he's concerned, the end product is the deal. And he will come to any and look at all the pieces in play in order to make that deal. So there's a fresh dynamic in the peace process. There's, after a bit of stasis under Obama, we're now in a position where the Americans are very much engaged. It's a risky strategy. I always say that politicians, they can't resist the siren's call of trying to solve the Middle East peace process. But of all the people, if you would have said to me 5 or 6 years ago, well, Donald Trump might be able to do it, I would have said, Simon, you need to go and have a lie down. But now I'm actually getting to the stage where I think he might be able to do it. Now, Tomas is right too. It's been one of the quietest summers in Israel in a long, long time, which is obviously to be welcomed. But as a father to a new daughter, I know one thing. When things go quiet, I get worried. So when I don't hear the ruckus and I don't hear noise, I think something's going on. And for me, what's going on in the background is the Iran deal. The Iran deal and the fact that the sanctions have really come to an end, that there's been a lot of buy-in from Germany and other countries who are now investing vast amounts in Iran. We can now see the ramifications of that. Hamas is decided to go quiet, not for any other reason. It hasn't suddenly decided that we suddenly like Israel and let's hug it out. They've gone quiet because they're regrouping. They're trying to form a new alliance with Iran, get some money from the Iranians, realizing that the Egyptians, the old roots are pretty much cut off. Meanwhile, Iran is pouring millions and millions into Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yep. So we can see what's going on in Lebanon. They're trying to start a proxy war again. So I'm amazed and I'm delighted that Trump and Netanyahu have said, listen, fix it or nix it. It's a conversation that needs to happen. The problem isn't with the US or Israel right now. The problem lies in Europe and this inability to turn around what is fundamentally a flawed deal. And not only is it a flawed deal, but giving millions again to a regime which has sworn to the destruction of the only stable democratic state in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
Simon, may I just
of course,
comment? What is groundbreaking as well is what we heard just 2 days ago, that Prime Minister Netanyahu finally is going to visit Brussels. I mean,
22 years later.
Yeah, that's right. And obviously he was invited by the presidency, Estonia. He will see Macron, the Prime Minister, in Paris just the day before. But obviously what he will raise is exactly the issues that Alex just explained. You know, the situation in Iran, the situation in Lebanon, which has the potential of escalating completely out of control. And it's interesting, and I think for our viewers as well, to remember this, the 12th of December, this breakfast meeting that he will finally have with these leaders to sit down. And I think that's also a recognition from the European side to say, you know, listen, here is someone that we need to sit down with. And given all the assistance that Israel has given to Israel in the last few years during the terrorist campaigns, that, you know, finally he should be welcome. And I think, you know, from ECI's side, and I'm sure from WAPA's side, we say, you know, welcome, it's long overdue. Absolutely. But the Prime Minister should feel very much welcome here in Brussels in just a few weeks from now.
Excellent. And Alex, I suppose for me, looking at some of the major news events of 2017, I can look at some of the Islamic terrorist attacks that have occurred in London and Manchester this year, also the horrific attack in Barcelona. But I want to focus on something more political, and that is the election of Macron against Marine Le Pen, and also Merkel's re-election. Not so much focusing on their election victory, but also the surge of voters voting for parties belonging to the far right. Do you think in 2017 we're seeing the re-emergence of that evil taboo of fascism on this continent?
Well, first of all, to the second part of that question, God forbid that would ever happen. But whenever you see a resurgent kind of nationalism or this kind of populism, for me, it always points to one thing and one thing only: a political class or a political elite, if you like, that is lost or is disconnected from people's concerns. Now, it might not be trendy to talk about it, and in fact you get called all kinds of names, but people are concerned about jihadists coming back from Syria. People are concerned at the rise of fundamental Islam. People are concerned that their rights as citizens living in free European, Western liberal democratic countries are under threat from a religion and a bunch of people who hate everything that we stand for, and yet there's a strategy or an open door policy. Now, it makes me very uncomfortable as a Jew to talk about limitations and putting controls on people coming into the country, and indeed some of the language which is used against Muslims. I mean, a vast majority of Muslims are wonderful, peaceful people, but if we are talking about fundamental Islam, that's a different kettle of fish entirely. But what I mean is the conversation can make me uncomfortable, but it's a conversation that needs to happen. And until people like Merkel and Macron and others are willing to tackle this issue head on and at least allay some of the concerns that people have, or at least have a dialogue about it instead of just shutting it down completely and saying, no, we're not prepared, this is not how Europe operates, it's free and open borders and we do what we want and people can do it, then we're going to see the situation gets worse. And the problem for Jews is that we often get caught in the crosshairs of some of the anti-Islam feeling out there. So God forbid that these parties gain more and more traction. I'm encouraged that Marine Le Pen lost in France. I'm encouraged that Geert Wilders did the same in Holland. But equally, you know those games that you see in the fairground where you've got to get the hammer and the thing pops up in different areas. That's basically what you're dealing with populism across Europe. So you dealt with Marine and you dealt with Geert Wilders, and now you've got to deal with the AfD in Germany, and then you've got to deal with some of the stuff. And I mean, true Finns aren't necessarily a big problem, and I know they're going through difficulties at the moment, but these things pop up intermittently, and they pop up generally when a government has lost touch with its people.
And Tomas, we have to say that in the last 7 minutes of the programme, that this has been quite a year for Israel in terms of anniversaries. We've had the 120th anniversary of the First Zionist Congress in Basel, which you did a major event in the same hotel. We also had the 100th anniversary recently of the signing of the Balfour Declaration, also the 70th anniversary of the UN partition plan, and also the 50th anniversary of the liberation and unification of Jerusalem. How significant are all these anniversaries for Israel, and what does it mean for Europe today?
Well, I think, Simon, that from an educational point of view, these anniversaries are very important just to raise awareness of historical facts. And if we're just looking at what we will mark next week, the 70th anniversary of the UN partition plan, you know, it raises these questions again that Prime Minister Netanyahu always comes back to say that, you know, next week we could celebrate 70th anniversary of a Palestinian state. You know, the offer was on the table. It was a better offer that they could ever dream of receiving in the future. But the answer was very clear. It was negative. It was complete rejectionism. And instead they're starting a war with the aim of eliminating these people. So again, you know, one should be constructive, you shouldn't be negative, but once you look at the partition plan, it should be crystal clear that, you know, this was the plan 70 years ago, right or wrong. The Jews accepted it. It was a difficult, it was not ideal in any way to the Jewish community, and of course it was much less that was promised to them already in 1922 and 1920, but nevertheless they accepted it. So this is a good occasion just to revisit history. Of course, I just want to come back to one anniversary that I don't think you did mention, and that's the 40th anniversary of this historic visit of Anwar Sadat in the Knesset.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And rightfully, again, we have to ask this question, you know, it's not that far from Ramallah into Jerusalem, let's face it, but where is the Palestinian Anwar Sadat that would dare, that would be courageous and say, you know, listen, I want to come and speak into the Israeli Knesset. I want to walk on the path of peace and coexistence, and also knowing that, you know, there are compromises to be made. And I think this is another occasion to say, yes, peace is possible. If peace was possible between the Israelis and the Egyptians, certainly peace will have to be possible between people groups that have been living in the same country for much longer. So again, these anniversaries are easy, I think, for Alex and myself, you know, when we need to get down to messaging and to make a message very clear. And I think there are things we may disagree on. There are things that are complex, but there are other things that are very crystal clear, and this gives us an opportunity to say it out loud and clear.
Absolutely. And Alex, 2018 looks like it's going to be a big year for Israel. It's going to be a 70th anniversary as a nation reborn. How will you and others be preparing parliamentarians in the European Parliament for such a celebration?
Well, we'll do what we always do. We're going to put on a really good spread. In fact, we are slowly, steadily increasing the ministerial presence from Israel to Brussels. So not only is Prime Minister Netanyahu coming over, which we've already discussed, we have in December Gilad Erdan coming over, who's going to be addressing the ECI conference as well as having meetings with the Jewish community here, the Minister for Strategic Affairs, and the Minister who's responsible for dealing with basically BDS. We're going to be making the case that despite, I couldn't agree more with everything that Tomas has just outlined. Palestinians, by and large, are stuck in the past, and they're still trying to relive and refight battles which have been lost and hoping for a different outcome. Now, Israel isn't going anywhere. Israel is a country which is going to stay and prosper and continue to give wonderful things to the world in innovation, in high tech, in medicine, in any countless of ways that you could count. So we're going to be spreading that message here in the European Parliament. We're going to have ministers, we're going to have members of the Israeli Knesset talking about, listen, forget about the old arguments. Forget about what's been going on in the past and this, that, and the other. There's a peace process, okay? If that peace process moves on or it doesn't move on, that's fine. This is a problem which can be sorted out. In the meantime, let's get on and work together. Let's cooperate together in business, in innovation, in making both Europe and Israel a better place. And this is the message which we'll be bringing next year.
And with about 1 minute 30 to go, Tomas, what would you say the challenges are facing Israel advocacy for the European Coalition for Israel and some of the opportunities in 2018?
Well, the challenges are always clear, and we saw them just the other week with very aggressive Palestinian activists interfering in a Balfour event with flags and just appearing very, very disrespectfully. And also to know that these are groups, you know, those who are working against us, they're well funded, both by national governments in Europe and by European funding as well. And we have this dilemma that it's not easy, and we have never received any state funding, so the stakes are high. But I think, to come back to what I said, I think the arguments are on our side, and we all know the story about David and Goliath. You know, it was David who you know, came down with the victory. So we feel like this, David, and we know our Bible well enough, and we'll keep fighting this fight.
Excellent. Alex and Thomas, thank you for joining me on this program as we've reviewed the news in 2017 and also projected some of the things we can expect for 2018. So thank you. And I just want to thank you for watching today's European report here from the European Parliament. I want to wish all of you, our viewers, a wonderful 2018, but let's continue to show our strength and solidarity with the nation of Israel and also the Jewish communities across Europe. So thank you for watching today's program.